Good evening, Rowan. It's the 23rd of October 2016 and it's just after 6 o'clock. And obviously, this is my usual Sunday evening video to reassure you I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Anyway, you will have noticed I'm making this video a lot earlier, and in fact if you're listening to this means that my new method of video making has actually worked. But if it doesn't work, then I'm going to have to make the video later on. This is why I'm starting a bit earlier today, so I'll have plenty of time to still make my video later on if this method of video making doesn't work. So anyway, I thought we could have a chat this evening about a book review that you wrote in the New Statesman, which appeared online on the 18th of October 2016, and it's about a book by John Milbank and Andrew Pabst. And you'll be looking at the first part of the review if this method of video working has actually worked. Anyway, so as usual, you're not just talking about the book that you're reviewing, you're promoting your own political agenda and your personal agenda. So I'm not going to go through the whole review, but I'm just going to comment on a couple of parts of it. So you say here then, there are crises and there are meta-crises. A system may stagger from one crisis to another but never recognise the underlying mechanisms that subvert its own logic. So are you talking about a system or are you talking about me staggering from one crisis to another? Well, first of all, I'm not staggering in the slightest. You may be staggering, but I'm not staggering. From one crisis to another, well, you've engineered a lot of crises in my life, haven't you? And you're trying to continually create them now because you're so disturbed and you're a psychopath and you can't learn that I'm not going to give you what you want. So you always think that the next crisis, as you imagine it anyway, is going to be the one that's going to make me snap and come round to your way of thinking and to give you what you want. So the system may stagger from one crisis to another but never recognise the underlying mechanisms that subvert its own logic. Well, what underlying mechanisms would that be? Are you talking about sex again underlying there? Because you do allude to sex an awful lot, and I've made a couple of videos about that. The underlying mechanisms that subvert its own logic. Well, I shall not be underlying you, Rowan. You can make no mistake about that, because obviously I'm saving myself for my beloved, so I'm not underlying anyone at the moment, but all that will change the moment that you're in prison, because then I shall be quite free to be with my beloved, and we shall be laid in each other's arms, having a nice time, and you'll be locked up with your burly cellmate, finding out if he's into S&M or not. On the subject of which, my offer to kick you in the balls still stands, so please let me know if you're interested. So you then say, we may never get to the final crisis. Well, you're promoting this theme continually now, aren't you, Rowan, that this is going to be never-ending, it's always going to be like this. And I've told you about 50 times already that that's actually impossible, because I will in fact drop dead one day, and in fact you'll probably drop dead significantly before that, because you're a decrepit old fart. So I've already told you, that I'm looking forward to eternity in heaven with Christ and the saints. So the final crisis, I suppose, if you could define it that way, will be dropping dead. And there's nothing that you can do to change that, is there? There's absolutely nothing you can do. You haven't got any control over these matters, even though you think that you're God and you're in charge of the entire universe. So you say, we may never get to this final crisis, But so long as the inner contradictions are not named, the story will always be one of cyclical failure. Well, I personally haven't got any inner contradictions. You've got a lot of inner contradictions because, as I've also said before, you seem to think that your true nature is separate from all your evil, abusive deeds and all your lying and philandering and so on. So you've got a lot of inner contradictions because your personality actually isn't formed in the way that the personality of most adults is formed. And as I've said before, you're just a series of masks, and you switch masks one after the other simply to try and manipulate the outcome that you want. So I haven't got any inner contradictions. In fact, I'm a very single-minded person, and I have a relatively simple outlook on life, that I know what I want out of life. I want to be a Christian. I want to spend eternity in heaven with Christ and the saints, and I haven't really got anything that contradicts that, really, at all. That's really my goal in life. So I shan't be naming any inner contradictions because I haven't got any. But even if I did have any, I wouldn't be naming them to you because you're a sadistic psychopath and you hone people's weak spots so that you can manipulate and destroy them. So I wouldn't be naming them to you anyway. And you've got a lot of inner contradictions. So as long as they are not named, the story will always be one of cyclical failure. So you want to say that this situation for me is going to go on forever and it's always going to be a failure, that I'm a failure, I'm always going to be a failure, and it's just one failure after another. That's what you're saying. And this is what you've tried to engineer in my life over and over again. But as I've told you again already 50 times, or even more than that perhaps, that since my goal in life is to spend eternity in heaven with Christ and the saints, then it doesn't actually make any difference whether I'm a failure or not in the world's terms, does it? It doesn't matter because that's not the criteria by which it's decided whether you can spend eternity in heaven or not. This is faithfulness to Christ, and he is the saviour of anyone who wants to accept his salvation. So that includes me, and it doesn't include you, because you've sold your soul to Satan, and you're trying to drag other people, particularly me at the moment, down into that cesspit of filth and corruption in which you're wallowing, because you won't ever admit you've done anything wrong. And as I've said, morality is entirely defined by you in terms of whether a person is giving you what you want or not. So this is how you define morality, virtue, ethical behaviour, and so on. And people are very close to God if they're very close to you, because you think that you are God. I mean that quite literally, actually. You do literally think that you are God. So I'm not a failure because it's not me who's heading for hell. It's actually you who's heading for hell. So your story will always be one of cyclical failure. Well, it's cyclical failure in getting me to give you what you want, and it's cyclical failure in that you refuse to face the evil things that you've done. So you keep perpetuating this state of affairs for yourself, and this is why you're heading for hell, because you won't change, you won't turn to Christ and repent of your sins, you won't admit you've done anything wrong, and you're trying to ruin and destroy other people in the process of your own damnation. This is a book about metacrises, capitalism, democracy, nation-state politics, modern culture and education. All of these are living out a metacrisis of some sort. All of them are grounded in illusion and contradiction, whether it be the simultaneous overproduction and underprovision that typifies the capitalist system. Well, first of all, I'm just going to talk about the capitalist system, because the system that we have in Britain today and in the West generally isn't capitalist. Because, first of all, Vladimir Lenin said that the establishment of a central bank was 90% of communising a nation. So every Western country has a central bank. So somebody is controlling all the currency and the means of exchange, and that wouldn't be the case in a capitalist system. And also, a graduated system of income tax is one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto. So that's part of the communist system as well, not the capitalist system. And then you've got the fact that the state, from this taxation, I mean, apart from going and starting wars in places that couldn't possibly be of any benefit to anybody, provides state education and healthcare in Britain at least, and a system of unemployment benefits and sickness benefits and old age pensions and things like that. And none of this would happen in a capitalist system. People would be expected to make private arrangements. And in fact, healthcare was much cheaper for people when private arrangements were in place. That's one example. And actually, education was a lot cheaper as well. So the provision, having the state interfering in these areas of life, hasn't made things cheaper for people. It's made them more expensive, and it erodes the principle of capitalism to have a central authority, centrally planning these things. So if you want to criticise the current system, that's perfectly reasonable. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just complaining about the fact that communism has in fact been redefined as capitalism in the West. So you're talking here about the capitalist system, but the system isn't in fact capitalist. So you talk about the simultaneous overproduction and underprovision that typifies the capitalist system. Well, I'm not too sure what you mean by underprovision here, because, well, first of all, who's responsible for providing? Why does anybody need to be responsible for providing to other people unless they're too young or old or sick to take care of themselves? Why can't people work to provide for themselves? Are they not competent? Because I think this is the attitude that you have, that other people are inferior to you. This is actually, it's definitely true, because you've got extreme narcissism, and this is why you tend towards such extreme patronising left-wing ideas that ordinary people are just useless and they need the state to dictate to them how to live their lives and to be interfering in every area of their lives and stealing a significant proportion of their money through taxation. And then the people paying the taxes don't really have any say over how this money is spent, because it's used to start wars, for example, to teach children things in schools that maybe their parents don't agree with them being taught, and also to provide medical procedures that some people object to on ethical grounds. So you've got this very patronising attitude that ordinary people need the state to tell them how to educate the children and to be providing things for them because they're not competent to achieve themselves. So when you talk about under-provision, I'm not too sure why anybody would be expected to provide for anyone else, except in the circumstances that I've mentioned. And also you talk here about the simultaneous overproduction and under provision. And anyway, if we're talking about overproduction and under provision, wouldn't it be more accurate to use these terms to describe what happens when you've got central planning? Because, after all, what about the butter mountains and milk lakes and wine lakes that we had as a result of central planning in the European Union? And what about all the people who starved to death in the Soviet Union as a result of Soviet central planning? Some of that was deliberate as a means of ethnic cleansing and getting rid of political opposition, but not all of it, and there were in fact famines on a regular basis in the Soviet Union.
Canada was selling the Soviets wheat because the Soviets in the Bolshevik Revolution, the Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe. They had the most wonderful wheat, and they fed all of Europe from this Ukrainian breadbasket. Well, the communist leaders, being mostly intellectuals who had never been on a farm, and they had no idea where food came from, they decided to kill the peasants. In fact, the joke in Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution was, this is the workers' and peasants' party. They enslave the workers and kill the peasants. And that's why it's the Peasants and Workers' Party. So that's the story of communism.
It used to be said, and perhaps it's still said, that if the Communist Party of Great Britain had had the geographical network and the resources that the Christian Church, and particularly the Church of England, has in these islands, we would have been a Stalinist dictatorship many years ago.
So you're talking here about the simultaneous overproduction and underprovision that typifies the capitalist system, the symbiosis of oligarchy and majoritarianism that modern democracy exhibits. Well, this is a very contradictory statement here, because capitalism and oligarchy and majoritarianism kind of contradict each other, really, because capitalism is really based on free association and free trade. And if you've got oligarchy and majoritarianism, these are kind of contrary to capitalism, really, because if you get oligarchs, which we have at the moment, controlling the whole world, principally through the banking system, and then they've infiltrated other international organisations, they're controlling big business, and then there's the United Nations, the European Union, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and all these international organisations are all in cahoots with each other. They're controlling the means of production, artificially inflating prices, creating fake shortages or telling people that there are shortages of things, such as oil, for example, when there's no shortage of oil. It's the second most common liquid found on Earth, and we're always told that there's this shortage of oil, and this is to artificially inflate prices. And this is because a small number of people are controlling all the means of production that they're able to do this. And when the state is very powerful, then they can infiltrate the agencies of the state and governments and so on, to have the governments be passing laws which are to their advantage, and then they're controlling the media, so they're controlling the information that people are getting about the situation in the world with regards to conflicts and to supply and demand and to what's in the interests of the majority of people and all this kind of thing. So if the system were truly capitalist and it was based on free association and free agreements between people, then it would be much harder to control the means of production and artificially inflate prices, and to create massive surpluses as well, because no private individual or business would create a butter mountain or a milk lake or anything like that, because they wouldn't have the means to be producing more than they could sell. It would just be completely ridiculous. They'd be bankrupt within a minute. And it's only because governments can force people to give them money through taxation that these ridiculous surpluses arise, such as was found in the European Union. And this has absolutely nothing to do with capitalism. And if somebody is in business or a farmer or whatever, and they want to make money, then they're going to produce the food, for example, that people want to buy. They want to buy this food, they want to eat this food. So the farmer or whoever can make money by supplying food. So it's not in the interests of such a person or business to not have enough of the product to supply to the people who want it. So no system is perfect, and a capitalist system wouldn't be perfect, but the system of totalitarianism, which is what you get with socialism and communism, is far more detrimental, in fact, because it puts a very few people in control of everything. The most corrupt people rise in these institutions and take them over, and then they're very easy to infiltrate and control by people with bad motives, shall we say, from outside, like the international bankster cartel, who have formed this criminal conspiracy with fiat currency to rob the wealth of the entire world, and then they want to exterminate virtually all of us so they can have the whole earth and its resources to themselves, and not have the other peoples of the earth competing with them for these resources, which are in fact plentiful. We're always told that we're overpopulated, even though the Population Council was set up in the 1950s by John D. Rockefeller III. The Earth does have finite resources, but it's still a very big planet, and the people who inhabit the Earth today aren't using anything like too much resources for the Earth to cope with. So this is all a myth promoted by these oligarchs through the media and international organisations like the United Nations, and they infiltrate the state and its agencies and legislative bodies in order that laws be passed and the system be rigged in their favour. And this is actually contradictory to capitalism in its truest form. I don't think anyone even knows what capitalism and communism are these days, because the terms of reference have been put all over the place, and the way it's presented in the media generally is that capitalism is bad and capitalists are bad people, and communism is good and is in the interests of everybody, when in fact the purpose of communism was exactly the opposite, and to be able to set up a totalitarian state. That was the purpose of communism. It was never about helping or liberating poor people. And it's quite interesting now how you're presenting majoritarianism as if it were a bad thing. Because when I was an Anglican and you were engineering all these catastrophes and telling people to behave towards me in a certain way and say certain things to me, one of the things that Anglicans said to me was that other people are not like you, they don't think like you. So in that instance, when you wanted me to conform to what other people were thinking, like David Peat was amazing, and Anglican practices were amazing, like not investigating abuse and that kind of thing, other people don't think like me. So majoritarianism was a very good thing when you were trying to force me to conform to what you wanted. You thought majoritarianism was great then, and you tried to force me to conform by appealing to the majority. And now you're presenting majoritarianism as if it were a bad thing, and majoritarianism and oligarchy as if they were intrinsic elements of each other, when they're really not related intrinsically. So majoritarianism is now a bad thing, and I think the reason for that is this.
You know the public will finish you. Is your brain really that miniature? You full of crap, give yourself an enema.
Yes, I found myself, like so many others, feeling rather stunned the morning after the referendum, and wondering where we were going and what country I now lived in. The fact is, of course, that whatever we say in this overblown opinion poll called a referendum, we are actually involved with one another in ways that are not going to be torn up quick. Of course, discussing climate change will get us into discussing what democracy means sooner or later in a very acute and possibly uncomfortable way.
So I've moved on a few paragraphs now, and here you're saying, the inevitable outcome of all this is the dramatic triumph of a kind of fleshless, bodiless process of wealth creation, which produced the 2007-2008 financial crash. Well, I'm not sure that you're talking about the financial crash there with your choice of fleshless, bodiless process of wealth creation. I rather think that you're talking about me refusing to prostitute myself because you're a completely depraved, sex-crazed stalker who won't take no for an answer. And you've stalked me around the world simply to try and force me to make the correct choice as you see it, because I made the wrong choice when I refused you sex in 1994. So you're a sex-crazed stalker, a depraved psychopath, and and you're talking here about the fleshless, bodiless process of wealth creation. Well, I am going to have a lot of wealth when I've finished suing you, aren't I? I'm going to be a bajillionaire. And also, this fleshless, bodiless process of wealth creation, which produced the 2007-2008 financial crash, well, every single financial crash is caused by the criminal globalist bankster cartel, who are your puppet masters, because they create enormous amounts of fiat currency, which they create out of absolutely nothing. They're just numbers on a log sheet, and they create this money out of nothing when people sign an agreement to repay the money with interest. I've already talked about this, and so they get people, individuals, businesses and nations into enormous amounts of debt, and then they cut off the supply of fiat currency, so people can't repay their net debt, businesses can't repay their debt, so they end up making people redundant. And so those people then can't pay taxes anymore to the government, and then they're claiming unemployment benefit. So the government hasn't got any money anymore, and they start making cutbacks and laying off staff and everything. And then there's even less people who can pay off their loans. And the whole system escalates like this. And then people, businesses and nations are all becoming bankrupt. And then the globalist bankster cartel can confiscate real assets in exchange for this worthless currency that they've created out of nothing. And this is a criminal conspiracy that's been going on for hundreds of years, and it's intended to rob the wealth of the entire world. These people are worse than the mafia. And the other factor is that they not only cut off the supply of fiat currency, they actually destroy money which is already in circulation. And in the 1929 financial crash, which they also engineered, in the United States they destroyed a third of the money that had already been in circulation. And this is to force people into poverty and bankruptcy so they can be confiscating their assets. So that was the reason for the 2007-2008 financial crash, regardless of the behaviour of other people, really, and nations and businesses and so on. So you then say, so is the current corrosive muddle about the nature of democracy, the resurgence of a plebiscite ideal of democracy. So a plebiscite ideal is the idea that individual members of the electorate should be able to vote directly on matters of importance, such as leaving the European Union, for example, having a referendum. This is what this means: a plebiscite ideal of democracy, having a referendum. So we had a referendum, and Britain British people voted in a majority to leave the European Union. So that was a plebiscite ideal of democracy, having a referendum. So you don't think that individual people should be able to make decisions like this. You think it should be in the realms of a political elite, of whom I suppose you are one, particularly since you're in the House of Lords at the moment. So why superior people like you, who in your case just happens to be a puppet of the globalist bankster cartel who wants to destroy everybody and everything and destroy every civilization and kill most of us off and rob the wealth of the entire world. Superior people like you who are being controlled by the globalist control freaks, you're the ones who should be making decisions about whether Britain should be in the European Union or not, and not we minuscule people who are all inferior to the political elite of which you think you are one. So that's what you're saying in that paragraph. So you say then, the fantasy of politics is the direct expression of unmediated demands with all the risks of majoritarian tyranny that go with that. So I'm not in favour of tyrannies of any kind, but I'm not sure why a minority tyranny, which is what we've got at the moment, is better than a majority tyranny, really, because if it's a majority tyranny, then you would assume that more people would benefit from that, wouldn't you? And you're the collectivist, and this is supposedly the collectivist ideal, rather than robbing individuals of their personal power. This is, well, that's what you make out anyway. So this is the collectivist ideal, the greater good for the greater number, supposedly. So you should be in favour of majoritarian tyrannies then, shouldn't you? Rather than the minoritarian tyranny that we've got at the moment, where we've got an elite who's controlling everything, well, as much as they can anyway, that's going on among the plebs, so to speak. And anyway, I think that you're still upset about this.
You know the public will finish ya. Is your brain really that miniature? You full of crap, give yourself an enema.
So I've moved on a few paragraphs now again, and so here you're saying, Milbank and Pabst see the dissolution of this classical Christian picture by the individualism of the Reformation as a cardinal moment in the decay of the West. Well, this has kind of got the situation upside down, really, because one of the things that led to the Reformation was that, apart from the invention of the printing press, because a lot of people think that the Catholic Church was not allowing people to read the Bible before the Reformation, whereas in fact it wasn't that long before the Reformation that the printing press was invented. So virtually nobody could read, and books also were phenomenally expensive because they all had to be handwritten. And then printing with movable type was invented, and this meant that large numbers of books could be produced at a relatively cheap price, which made them more accessible to people. So there wasn't really any point being literate for the majority of people before the invention of the printing press, since nobody could afford to buy a book to read, or anything else for that matter. So this is what happened before this period. The printing press was invented, and also there were technical advancements in farming, which meant that people who previously were subsistence farmers could produce much more food, and this meant that not so many people had to work on the land. And I've talked about this before, that you've talked about the rise of individualism around the time of the 16th century, which is indeed true. But what existed before this rise of individualism around the 16th century wasn't collectivism, which is what you're trying to imply, I think. It was just that society was very rigidly ordered. People tended to follow the professions of their ancestors, and indeed, if you were a peasant or a serf working on the land, then you couldn't leave because people were subsistence farmers, really, and they didn't produce very much more than what they consumed. But because of technical advancements in farming, then they could produce much more, and this freed up people who would previously have had to work on the land, and many of these people moved into cities, and there was an expansion of cities around this time, and because of that, and because more wealth was being produced, because people could produce food more easily, this led to the foundation of universities and the expansion of universities. So people were moving about more, they were more socially mobile, they were going to live in cities, they were meeting and talking with people they wouldn't have otherwise encountered, and this led to one of the things that led to the Protestant Reformation in Northern Europe. There were more factors than that which led to the Protestant Reformation, but this was part of the social situation at the time that was going on. So you also think here that if you present Catholicism as being collectivist and Protestantism or the churches of the Reform as being individualist, because you've categorised me as an individualist, you think I'm going to go running out of the Catholic Church and leap back into the arms of the Church of England because that's individualism and the Catholic Church is collectivism. Well, this is just complete nonsense, because people become members of the Catholic Church as individuals. We're not absorbed or assimilated into a collective. That's much more the attitude of people in the Church of England, in my experience, that you're not allowed to deviate from the norm or there's something wrong with you. So despite all the propaganda around it, the Church of England, certainly in my experience, has a much more collectivist slant than the Catholic Church. So you then say, in other words, the very moment identified in conventional history as the birth of Western supremacy. So I'm just going to talk about that as well, because one of the things that happened as well around the 16th century was that people started to explore other parts of the world and colonise other parts of the world, and this also was related to these advancements that had been made in farming, which meant that the population of Europe exploded around this time because there was more food available, and so mortality rates dropped, and this is one of the reasons why people started exploring and colonising other parts of the world. So you've got part of this in inverted commas anyway, the birth of Western supremacy. I suppose that's what you're talking about, colonising other parts of the world. But these advancements in farming, ultimately what led to this event, advancements in farming in Europe, leading to the explosion of the population and the movement of people to cities, and then looking for new places to live where they could have land and make their own life. So that was one of the things that led to that. The triumph of a notion of individual right. So this moment identified in conventional history as the birth of Western supremacy, the triumph of a notion of individual right. People did have individual rights before that. I don't think that's something that came about in the 16th century. People had individual rights not to be murdered, not to have their property stolen and that. So even the lord of the manor couldn't murder his serfs. So people did have individual rights prior to this period, even though they were limited in the cases of some people, such as serfs. The recognition of the objective authority of scientific method. I'm not sure that that's when the objective authority of scientific method came about, because more propaganda is that the Catholic Church is anti-science, when in fact a great number of people who've contributed to scientific research have been Catholics, and sometimes Catholic priests, I mean particularly making advancements in the study of genetics, for example. So it's propaganda to present the Catholic Church as intrinsically anti-science, as has often been the case. And so you're saying that all these advancements that took place around the 16th century, which I've been talking about here, you're saying this book says that these become the cradle of the metacrises through which we are now living. Well, I just think this is complete and utter nonsense. I just don't know how anyone could possibly draw that conclusion. I really don't. I mean, when you look at how different society was prior to the 16th century to what it is now, but to be tracing the roots of financial crises and crises in democracy and so on, to what took place prior to the 16th century and in the 16th century, it's just completely insane, because society in the West is so different now to what it was in the Middle Ages. And look at all the advancements that have been made, like we've got a surplus of food, and we're able to stay warm, and life expectancy has increased dramatically, and we've got all this technology and people are better educated and healthier and all this kind of thing. And you're saying that all these things that happened around the 16th century are what's causing the problem now. Well, what would be the problem now if these things hadn't happened then? We'd all still be digging fields by hand or something like that, and having a high infant mortality rate, and everybody being tied to the land and having to work on the land so that other people weren't free to make more technological advances and advances in literature and culture and all this kind of thing. And actually this return to this agrarian lifestyle is what's proposed in Agenda 21, Sustainable Development. That's in the Agenda 21 that's been published by the United Nations, which is the globalist takeover and depopulation of the entire world. But they want to herd people and tell them where to live and how many children they can have and whether they can have children, and they want everybody to be working on the land. And they also want to ban meat eating as well and grazing flocks, so they'd only be growing vegetables. This is all in Agenda 21. This isn't a conspiracy theory. The United Nations has published it. Right, so there's just a couple of other statements that you've made in this article that I want to talk about. So here we have human survival, no less, depends on recovering a sacred cosmology. You wouldn't be speaking astrophysically again, would you? So unless I recover a sacred cosmology, I'm not going to survive. I think I'll take my chances. So here's my final comment on this article now. So here you are saying, and these are not the only points where the average left-leaning, right-thinking reader will raise his or her eyebrows, or just stop reading. So, the only right-thinking people, then, are left-leaning, according to your definition. This just exemplifies perfectly your totalitarian attitude, that you won't tolerate any opinions that are different from yours. This is because you're an extreme narcissist, and it's also because you haven't got any facts to substantiate your argument. It's all impressionistic bullshit. If you had any facts to substantiate your argument for a totalitarian one-world government, then you'd be arguing out in the open, wouldn't you? You wouldn't be behaving in such a subversive way. So you're not the only left-wing person who wants to eliminate people who think differently. These people consider diversity to be a bunch of people who all look different, but who all think in exactly the same way, and you're one such person. So there you are, a right-thinking person is left-leaning. Well, at least you came out with it at last. Anyway, I shall leave it there for now, because it's taken me quite a long time to record the parts of this video in my new video making method that I was trying out. So it's now 11:15, so I haven't really got time to be going out seducing priests anyway. So you'll be a bit disappointed about that, won't you? Anyway, I will leave it there because I do want a long night of peaceful slumber, dreaming about my beloved all night long. And I just can't wait until we can be together the moment that you're in prison. But don't forget to be alert, because I will be turning up to arrest you, though probably not this week because you're in South Africa. And I don't want a carbon footprint as big as yours. Although it's only a carbon footprint that's enormous. Not your actual footprint, despite your oversized shoes. Anyway, I'll leave it there, but don't worry, there's plenty more shit that you've taught already, so even if I don't come across any new shit that you've taught, I've still got plenty to be going on with. Hasta la próxima.
Don't try to change me, you're wasting your time. Now I got something much better in mind. Robert De Niro's waiting, talking Italian. You bring me alive. He's a bad, bad boy. I'm a bad, bad girl. And we're getting back to
It's why Catholics have the best sex.
Adelante.